Hello ladies and gentlemen, WillE here. A few months back there was a disturbance in the MMORPG force. A paradigm shift the likes of which we have truly not seen since the MMO market was dominated over a decade ago by World of Warcraft. Blizzard's mainstay game has now looked more mortal than it has in many a year, amidst the latest expansion failing to meet players' hopes, repeating mistakes of the past, and being scarce on non-time locked daily content. Whilst at Blizzard, accusations dating back to even the old guard who were constantly put upon a pedestal are now coming into question. It wasn't only the players that were tiring of the constant stream of disappointment either. Many content creators felt in a similar position, finding it harder to log into WoW each day and considering options that were now starting to look more and more appealing. And it was at this time that a competent game really came in its own to receive more widespread recognition than it would have been believed possible. Final Fantasy XIV. Everything really fell into place for it to be able to see incredible growth over such a short space of time, and despite us not having the exact numbers, I think the assessment it's currently the most played MMORPG is not too difficult to believe. What with running out of both digital copies some time ago and choosing to halt sales as Endwalker has caused servers to become well overpopulated, and I was feeling in somewhat of a similar position to many at the time. Classic WoW had just finished, we were well settled into TBC, which was quite raid loggy once you got the start of the expansion out of the way. Classic Era had all of a dozen or so players on it, and Season of Mastery had not been announced yet, quite the portion of downtime, and as many did at this point, I decided to give Final Fantasy XIV a look. This game had also existed for many years, which had confidently and quietly been rising up the ranks, absorbing players from other MMOs and continually putting out expansion after expansion, and from what we heard as outsiders, the players who were into it really rated it. That was one thing that I think pushed a lot of people over the edge to finally giving it a go. At Blizzard and surrounding their games, you often get this air of an impression that can be quite a toxic environment where elitism and gatekeeping reign. Over on 14, the impression seemed to be the more the merrier, and so with an open mind in I went and decided to share what I experienced as a video, a bit of a different format from my norm too, to try and capture some of those live impressions. And at that point in time, I'd been doing all I could to avoid any and all tells of anything Final Fantasy XIV related. If I understood one thing, it was that 14 had a heavy story emphasis, so I didn't want that spoiled. I wanted to learn all I could as a new player and get that authentic, fresh experience. I put a video about 14 out 3 or so months ago now, and I've logged in now and again, and each time I do, I'm met with a seemingly never-ending questline. The story of A Realm Reborn to fully get into the game isn't exactly the smallest hurdle to cross, and it's one that every single player must do to fully unlock the features of the game and start to get into the expansions. In fact, it's been a recurring piece of criticism against 14 that A Realm Reborn story is kind of, well, not exactly the most thrilling. But just get through it and it's totally worth it. I've heard nothing of showers of praise for the expansions and beyond. It's just, well, you've got to get over this little hurdle first. And I'm actually a little surprised that so many players have pushed through and gotten into the later game stages. 14, for me at least, deviates quite considerably from what usually makes an MMO, where emphasis is placed on the player and how they interact with others and shape their own gameplay. 14 instead takes the RPG and quite clearly puts that element first and foremost. 14 is there to tell you to play their story, and then once you've sat down and gotten through the whole thing, then you can really start to play with the toys the game has to offer. Now, yes, I could go through the quests and just skip every single line of dialogue, only watching cutscenes and the voice parts perhaps, but that seems to be entirely missing the point of what 14 hopes to deliver by being narrative first. Yet it's still difficult to bring myself to do, and there is a boost of course, but I'm not doing that either. Boosts and MMORPGs for me just don't fit together. Now the obvious thing to say here is if you don't like it, don't do it, which isn't entirely the point. It's not just for me to try personally, but something I want to explore in terms of having an interest in MMOs, as they're what I do. They're a genre I've played for years and have had a lasting influence on my life. Understanding why 14 has done so well, what it does differently, how it measures up against the big other MMOs, what makes it tick, basically. And current Realm Reborn, I was somewhat amazed to learn, has actually been reworked and shortened as of last year. It used to be even longer than it currently is. To sell somebody on playing an MMO, but then following up the conversation with, you kind of do need to play 30, 40, 50 hours before you really get into the good stuff is something that would cause any other type of gamer to think you're insane, or anyone doing, well, frankly, any activity at all. In fact, among MMORPG reviews in general, it's often the case you see comments are left saying, oh, but you only played till X level, you didn't get past Y, or you only played the game for Z hours usually being easily over 10, when pretty much any other game I can think of, if you're gonna have been going for over 10 hours and you think to yourself, this isn't great, you're going to stop. And then you're going to say to other people, well, it wasn't very good actually, I played it for quite a long time and it didn't really catch my attention. If the opening of something does not sell you on it, what on earth would possess you to think, well, only 30 more hours, it'll be worth it? How on earth can something like that be recommended? In fact, let's take a look at some other games from How Long to Beat just for a little bit of a comparison. Resident Evil Village, main story about 9.5 hours, completion 36 hours. Hitman 3, main story 8 hours, completion is 42 hours. Halo Infinite, main story 10 hours, completion nearly 1 day's playtime. But Will, you may be saying these are single player games, you cannot possibly compare the time investment to an MMO. Well, throughout A Realm Reborn, it didn't feel too uncommon from a single player game, if I'm honest. A metric ton of cutscenes and instancing, putting me by myself. At least there were some dungeons to break things up a little bit, but at times it felt like a real drag to try and get through. I'm curious to hear whether anyone else who has given the game a go felt something similar, especially after A Realm Reborn has been shortened, and found things to be a little slower than they would have liked. In fact, I finally decided to go and actually see where I was up to in the main story quest, how long until I can escape the Realm Reborn prison, and oh my god, I've barely made a dent in the absolute wall of quests that I have to do. Now, admittedly, I was doing a lot of side quests, which now I appreciate to have been a mistake if I want to progress relatively quickly. I'm about 10 levels above where I should be, and I have one serious block of main story in front of me if I do want to start hitting the higher levels and getting on a better basis with the game. I wonder to what extent the later game is pushed by those who have leapt over the hurdle of Realm Reborn many years ago. After all, Final Fantasy XIV is not a game where you need alt characters unlike many other MMOs. This should be a one-time experience to go through, unless something possesses you to want to see the story again. Perhaps that makes it a little bit easier to say grit your teeth, get through it, once it's done, then you can get to the good stuff. And I'm not the kind of person either who buys into rushing straight to the endgame for MMOs. I've happily leveled many characters across many different titles many times over. In fact, I often find that early game with a constant influx of activities and fast progression to be really enjoyable. There's just something about the pacing and duration of Realm Reborn that seems to miss the mark for me. The small little filler quests here and there where you have to go and pick up some dung, explore a pathway, or take something to a different NPC to get a few lines and then head back again. The sheer volume of content that you need to take in to be able to follow what's happening, and the gradual rate at which the story is drip fed into you. I really want to like it because the game does a lot of things that I like, but it's difficult for me at times. This feels like a side of Final Fantasy XIV that a lot of people have just pushed through in the end, but I've had a bit of a different experience, so I wanted to share that and see if it's something which is relatable at all, and whether indeed so many people can still recommend going through A Realm Reborn to see what lies ahead. Is it still worth the time investment, you would say? I imagine it's something I will get to the end of eventually on a very casual basis, as there is a lot that I like the look of in Final Fantasy XIV, and I do want to see more of it. And I'm going to have to get there one quest at a time. If you've had any similar experience at all, let me know as a new or veteran player. It is surprising that so many people have got across this hurdle, but maybe more people have bought into the boost than I appreciate. Either way, let me know your thoughts. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you on the next one very soon.